At 35 years old, Hassan Carter, a man whose quiet life was measured in the ringing of school bells and the smell of old books, earned a salary of $54,000 a year teaching history at Murphy High School. His world was one of modest means and profound passions, a universe contained within the pages of worn textbooks and the eager faces of his students. On a Tuesday evening in late October at precisely 6:02 p.m., that universe cracked open. The final bell of his father's life had rung, not in a classroom, but in the sterile, beeping quiet of a hospice room in Mobile's Spring Hill Medical District. The air thick with the scent of antiseptic and the faint, sweet perfume of wilting flowers seemed to rush out of the room, leaving a vacuum of silence that was heavier than any sound. Hassan sat by the bed, his large, gentle hand still holding his father's, which had gone from warm to merely pliant. David Carter had been a titan in Hassan's eyes, a man who built his own life with calloused hands and a sharp mind, a man whose deep brown skin held the stories of 70 years under the Alabama sun. Now he was just a still form under a thin white sheet. The nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, had recorded the time and whispered her condolences before slipping out, giving him a moment alone. The rhythmic pulse of the machines had ceased, and in their place was a profound, echoing nothingness. Hassan's own heart felt too loud in his chest. He looked at his father's face, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for months, and a single tear, hot and heavy, escaped his eye and traced a slow path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He let it fall, a tiny, salty punctuation mark at the end of a long and loving sentence. He pulled out his phone, a 5-year-old Samsung with a crack in the corner. His thumb hovered over his wife's name, Erica. They had been married for 3 years, a union that had felt, at times, like a negotiation he was perpetually losing. He pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Is it over?" Erica's voice was sharp, cutting through the thick veil of his grief. There was no warmth, no softness. It was a question of logistics, not loss. Hassan's throat was tight, a knot of unshed tears and shock. He cleared it. "Yes," he managed to say, the word a small, broken thing in the vast silence. He's gone, Erica. My father is gone." There was a beat of silence on the other end, but it wasn't the silence of sympathy. It was the silence of calculation. He could hear the faint, tinny sound of another voice in the background and realized with a sickening lurch that he was on speakerphone. It was her mother, Patricia. Then Erica's voice came back, no longer her own, but an echo of the greed he now heard whispering beside her. "Okay. Okay." Another pause, and then the words that would be seared into his memory for the rest of his life. "So, how much did his daddy leave us?" The pronoun was a physical blow. Us, not you, not the family, us. As if his father's entire existence was a long-term investment account that had finally matured. In the background, he heard Patricia's distinct, gravelly voice, no longer a whisper. "Ask him if he had a portfolio, Erica. And the house. Don't forget to ask about the house on the bay." Hassan felt the blood drain from his face. The single tear on his cheek suddenly felt cold. He was standing in the sacred space of his father's passing, the air still warm with the man's final breath, and his wife and mother-in-law were conducting a crude, verbal autopsy of his father's net worth. He couldn't form a response. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, a vacuum that sucked all the air from his lungs, leaving him dizzy and hollowed out. "Hassan, are you there?" Erica's voice was impatient now. "Did you hear me? We need to know what we're looking at here." He felt a strange and terrible calm descend upon him. It was the kind of calm that comes after the storm has leveled everything you own, and you are left standing in the rubble, realizing you have nothing left to lose. The grief was still there, a massive, unmovable weight in his chest, But something else was crystallizing around it, a cold, hard clarity. He saw his marriage, his life with Erica, for exactly what it was. He saw her. Without a word, he ended the call. The click of the phone was the loudest sound he had ever heard. He stood there in the humming silence of the hospice room, his father's hand still in his, and looked at the reflection of his own face in the dark screen of his phone. The face of a grieving son. The face of a fool. He had no idea in that moment just how deep the betrayal ran, or how meticulously he would soon begin to unravel it. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his marriage was as dead as the man lying beside him. What does a man do when he discovers the life he has built is a facade? He keeps living in it for a little while. He walks through the rooms, touches the furniture, and speaks the lines he is expected to speak. Hassan's life with Erica had been a carefully constructed stage play of domestic normalcy, and he had, until that phone call, believed his role as the loving husband was genuine. Now, replaying the last 3 years in his mind, he saw the dollar tags hanging off every prop. Their apartment on Oakmont Drive was a testament to their conflicting values. It was a modest 2-bedroom rental that cost them $1,150 a month, a sensible price that fit comfortably within Hassan's $54,000 salary. He had furnished it with practical, sturdy pieces from local stores, a comfortable sofa that cost $800, a solid oak dining table that had been a $400 floor model. To him, it was home. To Erica, it was a temporary holding cell. He remembered a Thursday night just a few months prior. He was sitting at that oak table, a stack of 8th grade essays on the American Revolution before him, his favorite blue pen in hand. The smell of the spaghetti sauce he'd made from scratch still lingered in the air. Erica was on the sofa, bathed in the blue light of her tablet, scrolling. "This couch is so brown," she had said, not looking up. "It's comfortable," Hassan had replied, circling a misspelled name. "Comfortable isn't the same as stylish, Hassan. My friend Chloe just got this gorgeous Italian leather sectional. It's a B&B Italia. Costs $14,000. It just completely transforms her living room." She sighed, a sound of deep and profound dissatisfaction. "Our living room looks like a waiting room at a dentist's office." He had looked up then, at the framed prints on the wall he'd bought at a local art fair for $50 apiece, at the bookshelf he'd assembled himself, overflowing with history books and paperbacks. "I like our living room," he'd said quietly. She had just shaken her head, the gesture communicating a level of pity that made him feel small. "You just don't have a vision for things, honey. You're happy with enough." She said the word enough like it was a terminal diagnosis. The car was another constant source of friction. Hassan drove a 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it. It was paid off, reliable, and invisible, which is exactly what he wanted from a car. He changed the oil himself and knew the exact pressure for the tires. Erica hated it. She called it the beige humiliator. "Seriously, Hassan," she'd said one Saturday, as they pulled into the parking lot of a grocery store, parking next to a gleaming white BMW 3 Series, a car with a starting price of $43,000. "When are we going to get a real car? Dropping me off at my work functions in this thing is embarrassing. It screams middle school teacher." "I am a middle school teacher," he had pointed out, his voice even. "You don't have to advertise it," she'd snapped, yanking the door handle. "David has money. He could help us with a down payment. Hasn't he ever offered?" The casual way she used his father's name, David, as if he were a walking ATM, always set Hassan's teeth on edge. "My father's money is his own, Erica. I've never asked him for a dime, and I'm not going to start now." "Well, that's your pride, isn't it?" she had said, slamming the door. "I hope it keeps you warm at night." These scenes, which he had once filed away as minor disagreements, now replayed in his mind as damning evidence. Her disdain for his life, for his profession, for his choices, was not just a difference in taste, it was a fundamental rejection of who he was. She had not married Hassan Carter, the history teacher. She had married Hassan Carter, the son of a man who owned a paid-off bungalow on Mobile Bay. She was just waiting for her investment to mature. The most painful memories were the ones involving his father's illness. As David's health declined over the past year, Erica's detachment had grown into a cold, clinical indifference. Hassan would spend his weekends at his father's house, cleaning, cooking meals for the week, or just sitting with him, listening to stories about the mobile of his youth. Erica rarely joined him. "I just find it so depressing," she'd say, scrolling through her phone, "and the smell of old people's houses, you know?" One afternoon, Hassan had called her from his father's place. "Hey, I'm running low on Dad's blood pressure medication. The pharmacy in Spring Hill has it ready. Could you possibly swing by and pick it up on your way home from the salon?" "Oh, I don't know, Hassan. I'm getting a full set of acrylics done. It's a $90 appointment. I can't just leave in the middle of it." "Erica, it's important. He can't miss a dose." "I'm sure one day won't kill him," she had replied, her voice distracted. "I'll try to remember tomorrow." He had ended up leaving his father with a neighbor, driving the 20 minutes back into town himself, fuming in traffic. When he got home that night, the prescription bottle on the counter, she hadn't even apologized. She was too busy admiring her new nails, a shade of glossy red that looked like fresh blood. Now, sitting in the driver's seat of his beige humiliator in the hospice parking lot, the engine off, the night dark around him, Hassan felt the full weight of these memories. They were not isolated incidents. They were a pattern. They were the blueprint of a betrayal so profound it had reshaped the very foundation of his world. He had been so focused on his father's physical decline that he had failed to see the moral decay happening in his own home. He had been tending to a dying man while living with a woman whose soul had been dead for years. The phone call wasn't a sudden aberration. It was a final, honest confession. The drive from the hospice back to the apartment on Oakmont Drive was a blur. The familiar streets of Mobile, usually a comfort, felt alien. The oak trees draped in Spanish moss looked like weeping specters in the orange glow of the streetlights. Hassan drove automatically, his mind a maelstrom of grief and rage. The grief was a deep, aching sea. The rage was a cold, sharp rock just beneath the surface. He felt disconnected from his own body, as if he were watching a movie of a man driving home to a life that was no longer his. He parked the Camry in its designated spot, number 2B. He killed the engine and sat in the silence, his hands gripping the worn plastic of the steering wheel. He could feel the cheap plastic of his $89 Timex watch against his wrist. He thought of Erica's $90 nails. The math was so simple, so insulting. He finally got out of the car, his movements stiff and robotic. He walked up the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment. He didn't want to see her. He didn't know what he would say, what he would do. He just wanted to crawl into bed and let the world fall away. He unlocked the door, number 314, and stepped inside. The apartment was dark and quiet. He had expected to find her on the sofa, maybe with the television on, ready to perform the role of the grieving wife. But the living room was empty. A sliver of light emanated from the spare bedroom, the room they used as a makeshift office. A low hum came from within. He walked towards it, his footsteps silent on the cheap laminate flooring. The door was ajar. He pushed it open gently. And there she was. Erica was sitting at the small IKEA desk, her back to him. She was wearing a silk robe he'd bought her for their anniversary, a $250 luxury he couldn't really afford. The only light in the room came from the screen of her laptop, a sleek $1,500 MacBook Air. It cast a pale, ghoulish glow on her face and reflected in the lenses of her stylish, black-framed glasses. Her fingers were flying across the keyboard, the clicking of the keys the only sound in the apartment. Hassan stood in the doorway, a ghost in his own home. His face was still damp from his earlier tear. The raw, ragged wound of his father's death was still fresh, and his wife, not 10 feet away, was not waiting for him, was not preparing a cup of tea, was not even pretending to mourn. She was working. He moved a half step to the side, his angle changing just enough to see the screen. The words were black on a stark white background, composed in a formal, business-like font. It was an email. He could read the recipient's name, jharrisonharrisonlegal.net. It was an attorney. Her attorney. He didn't need to see anymore, but he couldn't look away. His eyes scanned the text, his mind absorbing the words with a horrifying clarity. Subject, beneficiary inquiry, estate of David Carter. Dear Mr. Harrison, I am writing to you this evening to formally retain your services regarding an impending probate matter. My husband's father, David Carter, passed away this evening, October 24th, at approximately 6:02 p.m. at the Spring Hill Hospice Center. While my husband, Hassan Carter, is the direct heir, I anticipate being named as a primary spousal beneficiary of the estate. The primary asset is a waterfront property on Mobile Bay, estimated value in excess of $400,000, as well as a significant investment portfolio. I am requesting your guidance on the necessary steps to expedite the probate process and ensure my interests are protected. I would like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss strategy. Sincerely, Erica Carter Hassan felt the floor tilt beneath him. The cold, sharp rock of rage in his chest shattered, and a white-hot fury poured through his veins. Expedite the probate process. Ensure my interests are protected. Strategy. These were not the words of a grieving daughter-in-law. These were the words of a corporate raider planning a hostile takeover. She had not even waited for his father's body to grow cold. She had not waited for him to get home. While he was holding his dead father's hand, she was drafting a letter to her lawyer. The sheer, calculated audacity of it was what stunned him the most. The speed, the efficiency. This was not a plan born of sudden opportunity. This was a plan that had been waiting, fully formed, for the moment of his father's death. The "how much did he leave us?" was not a slip of the tongue. It was the activation of a long-dormant business plan. He saw it all then. The complaints about his car, the desire for the expensive sofa, the disdain for his job. It was all part of her strategy. She wasn't just married to him. She had acquired him as a speculative asset, a future claim on his father's wealth. He was the bridge to the life she felt she deserved, and his father's death was simply the toll that needed to be paid. A wave of nausea washed over him. He backed away from the door, his movements as silent as a cat's. She hadn't heard him. She was still typing, her face a mask of intense concentration. He retreated down the hallway back into the dark living room. He sank onto the brown sofa she hated so much, and the comfortable cushions felt like a mockery. He put his head in his hands, but he did not cry. The tears were gone, burned away by the heat of his anger. In that moment, something inside him shifted permanently. The soft-hearted history teacher, the man who believed in the good of people, died a quiet death in that dark living room, and a new man began to emerge from the ashes. A man who understood strategy, a man who had just been handed a declaration of war and knew with every fiber of his being that he would not lose. He had a new history to write, the history of what happened next. The next few days were a masterclass in strategic restraint. Hassan moved through his life with a grief-suspended composure that everyone mistook for shock. In reality, he was a submarine gliding through dark waters, his periscope up, observing, recording, and waiting. He was playing the part of the grieving son and bewildered husband, and he was playing it perfectly. He finally went into their bedroom later that night. Erica was there, the laptop closed. She had changed into pajamas and was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face arranged into a mask of solemn concern. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice now a soft, sympathetic coo. She stood up and moved to embrace him. "I'm so sorry. I was just giving you your space. I didn't know what to do." Hassan let her wrap her arms around him. Her touch felt like ice. He could smell the faint, expensive scent of her $120 Chanel perfume. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his eyes open, staring at the blank wall behind her. He felt nothing. It was a stunning and terrifying realization. The love he thought he had for this woman had been cauterized, leaving behind only scar tissue. "It's okay," he said, his voice a low murmur. He pulled away. "I'm just tired. It was a long day." "Of course it was," she said, stroking his arm. Did you make any arrangements for the funeral and everything?" "I called the funeral home from the hospital," he lied smoothly. "They'll handle everything. The will reading. Dad's lawyer will call about that. I guess it will be sometime next week." He deliberately kept it vague. He knew he had to control the flow of information. Knowledge was power, and he was hoarding it. "Okay, well, don't you worry about a thing," she said, her voice full of false brightness. "I'll handle everything here. You just focus on grieving." The word in her mouth sounded like an obscenity. The next morning was Saturday. Hassan woke up at 6 a.m., his usual time. For a split second, he forgot, and the first thought in his head was, "I should call Dad." The memory of the truth hit him like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the grief a heavy blanket. Erica was still asleep beside him, a faint snore escaping her lips. He looked at her face, relaxed in sleep, and felt a profound and chilling detachment. It was like looking at a stranger. He got up, showered, and dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a gray sweatshirt. He went into the kitchen and made coffee, the familiar ritual a small anchor in his churning world. At 9:15 a.m., Erica's phone rang, its cheerful, tinkling ringtone an assault on the quiet morning. She had left it on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up. Mom. Hassan watched the phone. He let it ring. On the fourth ring, Erica shuffled into the kitchen, yawning. She glanced at the screen and answered. Putting it on speaker, as she so often did, "Morning, Mom," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "Erica, darling, I was just calling to check in on you both." Patricia's voice crackled through the small speaker. It was a voice lubricated by years of brunch cocktails and casual condescension. "How is poor Hassan holding up?" "He's okay. Still in shock, I think," Erica said, pouring herself a cup of the coffee Hassan had made. Of course. It's a terrible blow," Patricia said, her tone devoid of any real sympathy. "Now listen. I don't want to be indelicate at a time like this, but it is crucial that you and Hassan get your hands on that will as soon as possible. People can be funny about these things. Old girlfriends, long-lost cousins. You need to know what you're dealing with, for your security, darling. That's all I'm concerned about. Your financial security." Hassan stood by the sink, his back to them, rinsing his coffee cup. He didn't turn around. He just listened. "I know, Mom," Erica said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm working on it. He said the lawyer would call next week. He's being very quiet about everything." "Well, you need to manage him," Patricia said sternly. "He's emotional right now. Men get stupid when they're emotional. Make sure he doesn't go making any grand, sentimental gestures. That property is your future. Don't you forget it." "I won't," Erica promised. Hassan turned off the water. He turned around, his face a perfect mask of weary sadness. "Good morning, Patricia," he said, his voice calm. There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end of the line. Erica's eyes went wide. "Oh, Hassan, dear boy," Patricia stammered, her voice instantly shifting to one of syrupy sweetness. "I was just telling Erica how sorry we all are. Your father was a man, a real man." "Thank you, Patricia," Hassan said. He looked directly at Erica. "I'm going to go for a drive. Get some air." "Of course, honey," Erica said, quickly ending the call with her mother. "You do whatever you need to do." He walked out of the apartment without another word. He wasn't going for a drive to get air. He was going to his father's house. The bungalow sat on a quiet street that dead-ended at the wide expanse of Mobile Bay. It was a simple, single-story house built in the 1950s with a wide front porch and large windows that looked out onto the water. It was painted a soft, seafoam green, the color of tranquility. His father had bought it for $60,000 in 1985 and had spent the next 30 years making it his sanctuary. It was worth, as Erica had correctly estimated, well over $400,000 now. Hassan used the key his father had given him, the one he'd said was, just in case. The house was cool and silent, filled with the familiar smell of old wood, salty air, and his father's pipe tobacco. It was the scent of his childhood. Grief washed over him again, sharp and overwhelming. He leaned against the closed door and finally let out a single, ragged sob. After a moment, he straightened up. He had a purpose here. He walked into his father's study, a room lined wall to wall with books. David Carter had been an amateur historian, obsessed with the rich, complex history of Mobile. There were books on colonial-era forts, Civil War blockades, the rise of the port, the civil rights movement. It was a treasure trove. Erica, in her helpful mode, had offered to come over and start sorting through things. She wanted to go through his father's desk, his filing cabinets. She was looking for financial documents, bank statements, the will. He had told her to wait, that he wasn't ready. He went to the old roll-top desk that dominated the room. He knew where his father kept his important papers, in a locked drawer on the bottom right. He had another key for that. He opened it. Inside were neat files, labeled in his father's precise handwriting, taxes, insurance, deeds, and one, right on top, labeled Last Will and Testament, J. Dubois, Esquire. He pulled it out. It was in a thick manila envelope. His heart pounded. He was about to open it when he saw something else beneath it. A smaller, personal-sized envelope made of thick, cream-colored paper. On the front, in his father's familiar script, it just said, Hassan. His hands trembled as he picked it up. It was sealed. This was it. This was the real inheritance. Not the house, not the money, but this. The final word. He sat down in his father's worn leather chair, the leather groaning in protest, and carefully opened the letter. On Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, Hassan walked into the offices of Dubois and Associates, a respected law firm housed in a historic brick building on Royal Street in downtown Mobile. The air inside smelled of floor wax and old paper. A polite receptionist led him down a quiet hall to a corner office. The name on the door was engraved in a brass plate, Jean-Luc Dubois, Esquire. Mr. Dubois was a distinguished black man in his late 60s, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and kind, intelligent eyes behind a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a perfectly tailored three-piece suit that probably cost more than Hassan's monthly rent. He rose from behind a massive mahogany desk as Hassan entered, his expression one of genuine sympathy. "Hassan," he said, his voice a warm baritone. He extended a hand. Please come in. Sit down. I was so very sorry to hear about your father. David was more than a client. He was a friend, a fine man. Thank you, Mr. Dubois, Hassan said, his voice quiet. He sat in one of the two plush leather chairs facing the desk. Outside the large window, the glass towers of the city's financial district reflected the morning sun, a world away from the quiet dignity of this room. Your father was a meticulous man, Mr. Dubois began, opening a thick file on his desk. It was labeled Carter, David L. He wanted to ensure that his affairs were in perfect order to make this difficult time as easy as possible for you. Hassan simply nodded, his hands resting on his knees. He thought of Erica's email, her talk of strategy and expediting the process. The contrast was stark. Now, Mr. Dubois continued, your father made some updates to his will last year, on August 17, 2023, to be precise. He came to see me. He was very clear, very specific about his wishes. Mr. Dubois slid a thick document across the desk. It was the original copy of the will, bound in a blue legal cover. This is the legally executed and recorded last will and testament. It supersedes all previous versions. Hassan looked at it, but didn't reach for it. He already knew what it said. He had his father's letter folded in the inside pocket of his jacket, a secret source of strength. He had read it a dozen times, sitting in his father's study, the words burning themselves into his soul. Son, the letter began, in his father's strong, looping cursive. If you are reading this, then I am gone. And my first regret is that I am not there to help you through this. My second is that I must burden you with this knowledge at such a time. Forgive me for what I must say, but a father's duty is to protect his son, even after he is gone. I have watched you with your wife, Erica. I have seen the way she looks at this house, at my things. I have heard the things she says when she thinks an old man isn't listening. I have seen the hunger in her eyes, son, and it is not a hunger for you. It is for what she thinks you will one day have. A man's legacy is not the money he leaves behind. It's the character he builds, the love he gives, and the wisdom he passes on. This house, this land, it is not a prize to be won. It is our family's anchor. It's a place of peace. It cannot belong to someone who sees it only for its price tag. I have protected you, Hassan. I have protected my legacy. The will is clear. I trust Mr. Dubois to execute it precisely. What you do after that is your own choice, but do not let her take your peace. That is the most valuable thing you will ever own. I love you, son. Be strong. Be happy, Dad. A tear had fallen on the paper as he'd read it, smudging the ink on the word happy. He had folded it carefully, the paper a sacred text. It was validation. It was permission. It was his father's final act of love. Hassan? Mr. Dubois' voice brought him back to the present. I'm sorry, Hassan said. Yes, he was a very clear man. Indeed, the lawyer said, a knowing look in his eyes. He seemed to understand more than Hassan had said. Let's go over the key provisions. Your father's estate consists of three primary components. First, the residential property at 15 Bayview Lane, which has a current appraised value of approximately $450,000. It is owned outright, with no mortgage or liens. Hassan nodded. Second, a diversified investment portfolio managed by Morgan Stanley, with a current market value of approximately $225,000. Third, his personal effects, including his vehicle, furniture, and his extensive collection of historical books and documents, which, while difficult to assign a dollar value to, are of immense personal and academic worth. All told, the liquid and tangible assets of the estate are valued at roughly $675,000, before taxes and fees, of course. Mr. Dubois paused, letting the numbers sink in. It was a significant sum, More money than Hassan had ever imagined having. But in that moment, the numbers felt abstract. The only thing that felt real was the letter in his pocket. "Now," Mr. Dubois said, turning a page in the file, "let's discuss the disposition of the estate. Article 4, Section A, is quite straightforward." He cleared his throat and read aloud. "I give, devise, and bequeath all the rest, residue, and remainder of my estate, whether real, personal, or mixed, of whatsoever kind and wheresoever situated, to my beloved son, Hassan Carter, to be his absolutely and forever." He looked at Hassan over the top of his glasses. "It's all yours, son. Everything." Hassan took a slow breath. "And Section B?" he asked, his voice steady. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of Mr. Dubois' mouth. He knew. Of course he knew. His father had surely explained the situation. He turned the page. "Article 4, Section B," he said, his voice taking on a formal, declamatory tone. He was, as I said, very specific. It reads, "For the purposes of clarity and to avoid any ambiguity, I intentionally make no provision in this will for my son's wife, Erica Carter, née Rollins, nor for her heirs or assigns, and it is my express wish that she take nothing from my estate." The words hung in the quiet office, precise and devastating, a legal kill shot. He wanted to ensure there would be no grounds for a challenge, Mr. Dubois explained gently. By naming her and explicitly excluding her, he has legally fortified his wishes. Under Alabama law, while a spouse cannot be completely disinherited without a prenuptial agreement, this applies to the deceased's own spouse. Erica was his daughter-in-law. She has no automatic legal claim to his estate. This is ironclad. Hassan finally felt a long, slow exhale leave his body, a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 3 years. It was done. His father had seen it all and had protected him. "What happens now?" Hassan asked. "Now we schedule the official reading of the will. It's a formality, but a necessary one. We will notify all interested parties. In this case, that would be you as the sole beneficiary." "My wife. She believes she is an interested party," Hassan said. "She should be there." Mr. Dubois looked at him, his gaze sharp and appraising. He saw the grief in Hassan's eyes, but he also saw the steel beneath it. He nodded slowly. "As you wish. When would you like to schedule the reading?" "Tomorrow," Hassan said without hesitation. "Tomorrow afternoon." "Very well," the lawyer said, making a note. "Tuesday, October 26th, at 2 p.m., right here in our conference room. My office will send her a formal notification by courier this afternoon." Hassan stood up. He felt taller, lighter. "Thank you, Mr. Dubois, for everything." "I'm just doing my job, Hassan," the lawyer replied, standing as well. "Fulfilling your father's wishes. He was very proud of you, you know. He told me so himself. Said you were a man of character, like his father before him." The words were a balm on Hassan's raw grief. He shook the lawyer's hand, a firm, decisive grip. As he left the office and stepped back out into the bright Mobile sunshine, he pulled out his phone. He dialed Erica's number. "Hi, honey," she answered, her voice anxious. "Any news?" "The lawyer's office called," he said, the lie coming easily now. "The reading is tomorrow, 2 o'clock, at his office downtown." "Oh, so soon?" There was a tremor of excitement in her voice. Okay, great. I'll clear my schedule. What should I wear?" The question was so perfectly, tragically her. "Wear whatever you'd like, Erica," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It's just a formality." He hung up the phone. It was more than a formality. It was a reckoning, and it was coming. The conference room at Dubois and Associates was a space designed to communicate quiet, unshakable power. The table was a single massive slab of polished mahogany, 20 feet long, reflecting the cool, recessed lighting from the ceiling. On one side, a wall of glass offered a panoramic view of downtown Mobile and the shimmering bay beyond. The glass towers, cold and distant, seemed to mock the emotional drama about to unfold. On the other wall hung a collection of antique maps of the Alabama coastline, a nod to the firm's deep local roots. The air was cool and still. Hussein arrived first at 1:45 p.m. He wore a simple dark gray suit he'd bought for $300 at a department store for his father's funeral, which had been a small private service that morning. On his wrist was his plain $89 Timex watch. He felt calm, centered. The grief was a low, constant hum beneath the surface, but the cold clarity he'd felt in the hospice room had solidified into a quiet resolve. He was here to bear witness to his father's final act. Mr. Dubois greeted him and led him into the room. "Are you ready for this, son?" the lawyer asked gently. "I am," Hassan said. He chose a seat at the table, not at the head, but on the side, facing the door. A position of observation. At precisely 1:58 p.m., the door opened. Erica and her mother, Patricia, swept in. They were dressed for a victory they believed was already won. Erica wore a severe, form-fitting black dress that he recognized from an online boutique. It had cost $1,800. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was flawless. She looked less like a grieving daughter-in-law and more like a CEO about to close a major deal. Beside her, Patricia was a formidable presence in a charcoal gray Armani pantsuit that cost at least $2,500. A string of pearls was clasped around her throat. They moved with an air of entitlement, their expensive shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. "Hassan, darling," Patricia said, her voice oozing a sympathy that didn't reach her cold eyes. She patted his shoulder as she passed. "So brave of you to be here." Erica didn't speak to him. She gave him a tight, nervous smile and took the seat directly opposite him, her purse with its prominent designer logo placed carefully on the table in front of her. Patricia sat beside her daughter, her back ramrod straight. They looked like a pair of sleek, patient vultures. Mr. Dubois entered and took his seat at the head of the table. He placed a pair of reading glasses on his nose and opened the blue-bound will. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint whisper of the air conditioning. "Good afternoon," Mr. Dubois began, his voice filling the room. "We are gathered here today for the reading of the last will and testament of David Lawrence Carter, executed on August 17th, 2023. I will now read the document in its entirety." Erica leaned forward almost imperceptibly, her hands clasped on the table. Patricia had a small, tight smile fixed on her face. Mr. Dubois began with the preamble. "I, David Lawrence Carter, a resident of Mobile County, Alabama, being of sound mind and memory, and not acting under duress, menace, fraud, or undue influence of any person whomsoever, do hereby make, publish, and declare this to be my last will and testament." He continued through the initial articles, revoking previous wills, directing the payment of debts and funeral expenses. His voice was a steady, emotionless drone. Hassan kept his eyes fixed on Erica. He watched as her feigned solemnity began to give way to a barely concealed impatience. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the polished wood of the table. "Article 3, Mr. Dubois continued, disposition of assets." This was it. Erica's posture straightened. She shot a quick, triumphant glance at her mother. "I hereby direct my executor to oversee the disposition of my entire estate. The primary assets of said estate include, but are not limited to, the residential property located at 15 Bayview Lane, Mobile, Alabama, a financial portfolio held with Morgan Stanley, account number ending in 7742, a 2018 Ford F-150 pickup truck, and all personal effects, including furniture, art, and my private library. He listed the assets with bureaucratic precision. With each item, Hassan could see the greed intensifying in Erica's eyes. She was mentally adding up the figures, her expression growing more and more satisfied. Then Mr. Dubois turned the page. He paused, took a sip of water, and looked at the three people before him. His eyes rested on Hassan for a brief second, a look of quiet support before he continued. Article 4, Residuary Estate. The Final Act. Section A, the lawyer read, his voice clear and unwavering. I give, devise, and bequeath all the rest, residue and remainder of my estate, whether real, personal, or mixed, of whatsoever kind and wheresoever situated, which I may own or be entitled to at the time of my death, to my beloved son, Hassan Carter, to be his absolutely and forever. Erica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She looked confused, as if she had misheard. She glanced at her mother, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head, as if to say, "Wait, there's more?" She clearly expected a subsequent clause detailing her own share, the portion designated for us. Hassan remained perfectly still. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching this scene from a great distance. He saw his wife, a woman he had once loved, poised on the brink of a chasm she could not see. Mr. Dubois cleared his throat. And Section B? His voice dropped slightly, taking on the weight of the words he was about to pronounce. For the purposes of clarity and to avoid any ambiguity, he read, slowly and deliberately, I intentionally make no provision in this will for my son's wife, Erica Carter, née Rollins, nor for her heirs or assigns, and it is my express wish that she take nothing from my estate. The words landed in the silent room like stones dropped into a perfectly still pond. The ripples of their meaning spread out, shattering the composure on Erica's face. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth fell open slightly. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from Mr. Dubois to the will on the table, and then, finally, to Hassan. In them, he saw a frantic, horrifying cascade of emotions: confusion, shock, denial, and then the slow, dawning horror of pure, unadulterated fury. She had been played. She had been exposed. She had lost. Patricia's face had gone rigid, her jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. The polite, predatory smile was gone, replaced by a mask of cold rage. She stared at Hassan, her eyes burning with a hatred so intense it was almost a physical force. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a living thing, thick and suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. Erica just stared at Hassan, her mind clearly struggling to process the magnitude of her miscalculation. She had built her entire future on a foundation of greed, and her father-in-law had reached out from beyond the grave and demolished it with a single, perfectly crafted sentence. Finally, the spell broke. Patricia placed a hand on her daughter's arm, a sharp, proprietary gesture. Without a word, she stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound of violation of the tomb-like quiet. Erica stood as well, her movements jerky and robotic. She looked like a puppet whose strings had just been cut. She never took her eyes off Hassan. Her expression was a silent scream of accusation. How could you? How could you let this happen? Hassan met her gaze. His face was a placid lake, calm and unreadable. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply looked at her, and in his eyes she saw nothing. No love, no anger, no pity, just a vast empty distance. He was a stranger to her now, and in that moment she finally understood that the money was the least of what she had lost. Patricia grabbed her daughter's elbow and pulled her towards the door. They walked out of the conference room without a single word of farewell. The heavy door clicked shut behind them, the sound as final and absolute as the closing of a vault. Hassan was alone with the lawyer, the will, and the ghost of his father. He looked out the window at the distant, glittering bay. It was his now. All of it. The house, the legacy, the peace. He had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a quiet, somber restoration of order. The drive away from the lawyer's office was the first time Hassan had felt something close to peace in a week. The coordinated strike was over. The bomb had detonated in the sterile quiet of the conference room, and he had walked away from the blast unscathed. He drove his 2012 Toyota Camry not towards the apartment he had shared with Erica, but towards the bay. He needed to see the house. His house. His phone, which had been on silent, buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. He knew who it was. He let it go to voicemail. When he finally parked on the quiet street in front of the sea foam green bungalow, he saw he had 5 missed calls and a string of text messages. He opened them, not out of concern, but out of a clinical need to document the fallout. The consequences were beginning to cascade. Text 1, 2:17 p.m. Erica. What the hell was that, Hassan? Call me now. Text 2, 2:18 p.m. Erica. This is a joke, right? Some sick, twisted joke? Your father was senile. This will never hold up in court. Text 3, 2:20 p.m. Patricia. Hassan, this is Patricia. You have made a grave mistake. We will be retaining counsel and contesting this illegal and immoral document. You will be hearing from our attorney. Text 4, 2:25 p.m. Erica. I can't believe you. You sat there and let him humiliate me. After everything I did for you, for him, you just sat there. You have no idea what you've just done. He closed the messages and checked his voicemail. There were 3 new ones. He listened to them in the quiet of his car, the engine off, the sound of gulls crying in the distance. Voicemail 1, Erica, voice tight with fury. Hassan, pick up the phone. You are not going to get away with this. That was our future, mine and yours. He had no right. And you are a coward, a weak, spineless coward, letting a dead man poison you against your own wife. Call me back. Click. Voicemail 2, Patricia, voice cold and menacing. Hassan, I hope you're proud of yourself. You have destroyed your marriage for a pile of bricks and some stocks. Erica is devastated. We will fight this. I promise you, by the time we are done, you will wish you had done the right thing. There are laws protecting spouses. You seem to have forgotten that. Click. Voicemail 3, Erica. Voice now cracking, the anger giving way to panic. Hassan, please, just talk to me. We can fix this. You can fix this. You can share it. That's the right thing to do. The moral thing. It's half mine, it should be. We're married. That money, that house, that was for us. For our future. I've been making plans. I ordered the new living room set from Crate and Barrel. The delivery is Thursday. It's $12,000, Hassan. The deposit was non-refundable. How am I supposed to pay for that now? Please, Hassan, call me. Click. He deleted the messages. The $12,000 furniture for a house she would never live in. The irony was so bitter, it was almost sweet. Her strategy had included spending money she didn't have, so certain was she of the outcome. The first consequence was the loss of the inheritance, the clean, surgical removal of a future she saw as her birthright. The $675,000 windfall was gone. The second consequence began the next morning. Hassan did not go back to the apartment. He spent the night at the bungalow, sleeping in his father's old room. At 8 a.m., he called a locksmith and had the locks changed on the apartment on Oakmont Drive. At 9:30 a.m., he was sitting in a divorce attorney's office, a small, no-nonsense firm he'd found online. By noon, he had signed the petition. Irreconcilable differences. Erica was served with divorce papers 2 days later at her mother's house in a wealthy suburb. The process server handed her the envelope as she was getting out of her own modest car, a car she despised. The public, quiet humiliation of it was a consequence all its own. The third consequence was financial, and it was brutal. The crate and barrel furniture she had ordered had to be canceled. As she'd been warned, the deposit was non-refundable, a $2,500 loss. But it was worse than that. In anticipation of her new life, she had been living on credit. A trip to a boutique in Fairhope had resulted in a $3,400 charge for dresses and shoes. Her Visa statement arrived a week later, showing a balance of $22,450. The minimum payment alone was more than she could possibly afford. She had no job. She had quit her position as a receptionist a year ago, stating that the $32,000 salary was insulting and that she needed to prepare for their new life. She was trapped. She was forced to move permanently into her mother's guest room, a beautifully appointed space that now felt like a luxurious prison. Her independence, which she had planned to purchase with David Carter's money, was gone. She was 34 years old and living with her mother, drowning in debt. The fourth consequence was social. News travels fast in the tight-knit circles Erica and Patricia moved in. The story, whispered over cocktails at the country club and lattes at uptown cafes, was intoxicating. Erica, the woman who had been so smugly hinting at a massive inheritance, had been publicly and explicitly cut out of the will. She hadn't just received nothing, she had been singled out for exclusion. The humiliation was total. Friends stopped calling. Invitations dried up. She was no longer the woman on the verge of a new life. She was a cautionary tale, an object of pity and scorn. Hassan, meanwhile, was methodical. He had the apartment professionally packed up. Erica's belongings, her expensive clothes, her beauty products, her collection of designer handbags, were boxed and sent to her mother's address. He sold the furniture they had shared, including the brown sofa she hated, and donated the money to the local historical society in his father's name. He filed the necessary paperwork with the court. He consolidated his father's accounts. He moved his few belongings, mostly books and clothes, into the bungalow on the bay. He did it all with a quiet efficiency that felt less like starting a new life and more like closing out a failed business, the business of his marriage. One final, desperate voicemail arrived 2 weeks after the will reading. It was Erica. Her voice was unrecognizable. The anger and panic were gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated tone. "Hassan," she whispered, I get it now. I messed up. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for that phone call. I don't know what I was thinking. Can't we just talk? Maybe I could just come see the house?" He listened to the message, and for the first time he felt a flicker of something other than anger or detachment. It was a faint, distant pity. She still didn't get it. She thought the house was the point. She thought that if she could just see it, touch it, she could somehow reclaim it. He deleted the message and blocked her number. There was nothing left to say. The consequences had cascaded, and she was now buried under the rubble of her own greed. His only job now was to walk away from the wreckage and start to build something real. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. The humid Alabama summer gave way to a mild, golden autumn. A quiet Sunday morning found Hassan sitting on the wide front porch of the bungalow on Mobile Bay. The sun, newly risen, cast a diamond-like glitter across the calm water. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient live oak in the front yard. The rain from the night before had washed the world clean, and the air smelled of salt, wet earth, and blooming jasmine. He held a warm ceramic mug of coffee in his hands, the steam rising to meet the cool morning air. Beside him on the small wooden table was a stack of student essays. He had a new assignment for his 8th graders at Murphy High, mapping Mobile's history. He was using his father's vast collection of maps, letters, and old photographs, turning the abstract dates and names from their textbooks into tangible, local stories. The kids were captivated. They were learning that history wasn't just something that happened to other people in other places. It was in the soil beneath their feet, in the bricks of the old buildings downtown, in the names of their own streets. His father's legacy wasn't just the house or the money. It was this shared passion, now alive and growing in a new generation. The house was no longer just his father's sanctuary. It was becoming his own. He had painted the study a warm, calming blue. He'd filled the rooms not with expensive, stylish furniture, but with comfortable, well-loved pieces that invited you to sit and stay a while. His father's books were everywhere, a constant, comforting presence. The silence of the house was no longer empty. It was peaceful, filled with the sounds of the bay and the quiet rhythm of his new life. He thought of Erica sometimes, but the thoughts were fleeting, like a distant boat passing on the horizon. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded to a pale scar. He had heard through the grapevine that she was working as a hostess at a restaurant downtown, trying to pay down the mountain of debt she had accumulated. He hoped she would. A few weeks ago, he had done something he hadn't planned on. He wrote a check for $5,000, drawn from his own salary, not the inheritance. He mailed it to her at her mother's address with a simple, unsigned note. It contained only 6 words: "For your peace, go build something real." It wasn't about forgiveness for her sake. It was about release for his. It was the final closing of a chapter, the last bill paid on a bad investment. He was severing the last tie, not with money, but with a gesture of finality. He wanted her to have her own peace so she would finally leave him to his. He took a sip of his coffee and looked out at the water. He was a man who had lost a father and a wife in the same week. He had been betrayed, humiliated, and tested. But he was not broken. He had discovered a strength in himself he never knew he possessed, a quiet resilience forged in grief and steeled by clarity. He had learned the most important lesson his father had ever tried to teach him, the one written between the lines of his final letter. True wealth isn't found in a will or a bank account. It has no dollar sign. It's not a house on the bay or a portfolio of stocks. True wealth is character. It's the peace you find in a quiet morning. It's the purpose you find in your work. It's the love you build, not the assets you acquire. It is the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you have built a life of integrity, a life that is truly your own. Hassan Carter was, for the first time in a long time, a very wealthy man. And he knew, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, that his best days were not in his past, but waiting for him, as bright and open as the bay itself. We all face moments that test our character and reveal the true nature of those around us. Have you ever had a moment of crisis that showed you someone's true colors? Share your story in the comments below. And let's talk about how we find the strength to rebuild. And if you're inspired by stories of justice and new beginnings, make sure to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more.